Peace and love, family. I just got a brief drawing I want to bring to the manifest, but I want to rise and give praises to the great God, the honors to his holy prophet, honors to all the ancestors that have come throughout the way, his holy prophet, the being Noble Drew Ali, and also every mastermind that came from the beginning of time all the way up to this present time. And my measure will be dealing with the Moorish teachings in regards to dealing with mysticism and the universal roots of the name Allah. Because there's so much conflict that people have when it comes to these names and these teachings and so forth and so on. And this is definitely laid up in the hours. And this is the best time I like to give my measure, so to speak. And we're going to try to be as brief as possible. And also make sure that this message is also fulfilling for those who seek to get a draw it. My channel, as I always state, is dealing with unity. This is what we are demonstrating here for those who are looking for the context of the content that will be demonstrated. It's all about unity and universalism. And that is what the brother Prophet Noble Drew Ali, Egyptian adept, termed as Islamism. So let me come forth with this special drawing and make sure I close out all these windows here so I don't get no interruption. Okay. Yeah, unbeknownst to many, family, we have been given so many different versions of who the people know the creation and the creator of the creation as, so to speak. You see, the creator has been given many different names, many different titles based upon the religious system that one is demonstrating under, be it through Judaism, Islam, Christian teachings. And we can go the whole nine when it comes down to dealing with the teaching. We can go in many different directions with it. We know that the common word that is used when we deal with translations is the word known as God. And this is a very controversial word in and of itself. The word God, if we were to try to deal with some type of tracing it back, it wouldn't take us nowhere beyond the English language, as we all know, even though we use this term for a lack of better words or whatever in order to give our Moorish kin and the world, over different insight as far as dealing with translating this name. Now, we look up the word God, and I've seen everything from dropping one of the O's and then getting, good, and that giving birth or whatever to God. I've seen also, just many different measures, but one that I've seen is that when you deal with the first alphabet, in the word that they like to call the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh and so forth and so on, you often hear them say Yod, YOD. And I can see some interchangeable activity that probably went on there. Also knowing that the Y is interchangeable with the letter I, and the I, was also used as a letter J. And then in certain language, if you go between the Arabic and Hebrew, you will see that J is interchangeable with G, modern Hebrew anyway. So if you were to replace the Y then with the G, then you can see the word God coming out of that. But again, that's just an attempt at pronouncing, particular letters in the alphabet. So that still too will fall short as far as going back into antiquity. That's just a way of reasoning this special word into being. I've also seen the breakdown of the word along the lines of what we call Gomar, Oz, and Debar. almost like an acronym, which means wisdom, strength, and beauty. So these are attributes that are said to be given to the Creator, God. That's another origin of where they try to bring the word God to the manifest from. But when you go into antiquity and you trace it back as far as you can go, again, it falls short when you lose the beginning origin of this special language that we call English. You see, reason why I say we lose is you got many different dates. Some people say it came at this time, then some people say it came at another time. And we know English consists of many different words, that come from many different languages, so to speak. That's why a lot of people call it, in some term, they say it's a bastardized language, not in a disrespectful way, but, they say it's basically a language of many different languages. And every language has borrowed words in it, but English has many borrowed words, mostly Latin in origin, Latin going back to what some people would call Greek, but we know Greek is really not Greek because it goes back to Phoenician, and that's a whole nother ball game right there. So nevertheless, when you deal with this term God, this is the most common term that you will hear people use for the Creator. When they translate it, that's the word they use. Now, the problem with this is that God is often being defined, if you go into a dictionary, as being a man. This is what the dictionaries say, right? But what about the names and the titles that are being given? When you hear such as, Yahweh, or you hear Allah, or you hear, all these different names, because if you go into Christianity, they too would translate the name Allah to God in English. I'm talking about Arab Christians, not Muslim, but Arab Christians. They still use the name Allah. And what we're going to basically show here, and I'm getting ready to show a few pictures right now to follow my measure, and I hope I can give some insight to those who may be seeking. Now, the oldest origin of a symbol that was adopted by the Muslims, for the name Allah, I seen here. Let me share the screen right here real quick. Okay. There we go. I think we got it. Yeah, we there. Okay, so this is actually an omelet or a pendant, and this would be Ta in ancient Kemet. These are the jet pillars on the side of him. You look at all these symbols, a lot of people like to call them glyphs, hieroglyphics, but that's a whole nother measure as well. We'll get into that at some other time. But this symbol here, because I've seen a video where there was a brother saying that the name Allah was found in the temple of Ta. But this is a symbol of Ta here, as far as dealing with, that being a symbol of Ta. If you go look up Ta, you will see what I'm talking about. It's almost like a but notice it's in the shape or the form of the expression of the body. And it's not strange because we're going to get into this, as well in a little bit. It's basically like a man standing between two columns or two pillars, right? Two pillars right here on each side of him. The jet pillar, which was also a symbol of stability and so forth and so on. There's a lot of meanings we can go into with that, but we ain't going to get into that here. So we see this particular symbol here that's expressed. And if you remember the name Allah in the symbol in Arabic, you would see this, and it would actually be what the A would be in Arabic. And this would be the L. This is the L, and then above that, you would often see, a carrier that makes this L a double L. And then you come into the H and so forth and so on. So it's Allah, right? If you've seen it that way. Let me show you something else. And this is dealing with just Egypt, certain measures. I want to read this because this is very important, because we want to also know, is Allah the same God or deity that is also referred to as Yahweh. Some people say Yahuwah, or some people say Yod Hey Wav Hey, whatever the case may be, you know what we mean. So we ain't gonna get into the semantics and all that. This is an excerpt from some of the works of Jeremiah Massey. And I want to go into this particular work here because it's going to lay a foundation for something we're going into in a minute. Now, notice we mentioned Ta. Keep that in mind. It says companions like the cherubim, the cherubim, pardon self, and the Elohim. It says, and this is just another way of saying cherubim, basically. You see, it say which are followed in the book of Genesis by the God named Yahuwah, Elohim. It says the one God in Israel is made known to Moses by two names. And we see the symbol, which a lot of people like to call the Tetragrammaton, right? And then we see basically, if you look at the end, these are just Yod, the same letter that we spoke of earlier when we came into the beginning of the broadcast. Also, it says IHUH, or IH. It says now a priest of On, right? It said would naturally learn, it said On of one of, where it says of On of one God, Atum Ra. It said who was HUHI, the eternal in character of God, the Father, and Il in character of God, the Son, which two were one. Now this is Egyptian teaching, right? It says in accordance with Egyptian thought, that which was forever was the only true reality. This was represented by HUHI, the eternal. HUHI is the God made known to Israel by the priest of On. Pay attention to this name. It says Jacinius derives the name of IHU from the root Hu, which does not exist in Hebrew, but it does exist in Egyptian. Hu or He signifies ever, everlastingness, eternity, the eternal. If you ever go into the teachings of the cosmology of Kemet, you will see it speaks of Hu and HUHET and Ku and Kuhet. You see, and this is dealing with the beginning of creation, what a lot of people would refer to in the book of Genesis as, the world being void without form and darkness upon the face of the deep. That's to give you interpretation of what they're referring to. In other words, the God who he represented the God that existed from the everlasting days of the past to the never-ending days to come. And this is being taught in the ancient Egyptian doctrine. It says who he was the title. HUHI was the title that was applied to Ta, right? Now, one thing we have to realize as well, that when you talk about, these expressions, or these principles in Egypt, contrary to popular belief, these are not many gods, and demigods. That was E. Wallace Budge and a couple of more of the Europeans' interpretation. A lot of this has to do with, really no different than if you were dealing with names in the Bible, and it says that God has many names, El Roi, El Shaddai, Adonai, and so forth and so on. It's no different than that, but being that they didn't understand it, they began to come up with their own insight and then give it to the people the way that they gave it to them. Oh, this is many gods and idol worship and so forth and so on. When in all actuality, in most cases, E. Wallace Budge didn't even translate, these special writings. And also he had Coptic Christians translating these special writings as well. So we can understand where that particular point of view would come from. As well, this is many gods, and so Egypt has got a bad rap for being just a nation of idol worshippers, a nation of people that didn't believe in the supreme being, pagans. But my research showed a whole different measure. Actually, the Egyptians had a prophet that was sent to them. According to Islam, that is special prophet. It wasn't Moses. He came before Moses. This one was known as Akhnuk. often known as Enoch. He was sent into Egypt according to Islamic teachings. He was the one who established teaching in Manafa, which is known as Memphis in this era and time, right? But Enoch or Akhnuk is also given the name Tehuti. Amongst the Greeks, he's known as Hermes. So just to give you a back history, they had a prophet that was sent to them, and he taught them the oneness of God, what we would call monotheism. Now, if you go into the teachings of ancient Kemet, you will find that Tehuti was the one who civilized Kemet, and he taught Osiris. You see, now Tehuti has two manifestations. He has a spiritual manifestation, being divine mind, and he is said to be a physical being who taught a physical being, certain teachings. And that's basically what a culture and everything else came from. So all of these records are being uncovered now. All of these records are still coming to the forefront, being dug up by archaeologists and, people just doing research. They finding papyri and everything all over the place. Ain't no telling they might find something tomorrow. But nevertheless, it's almost like a wealth of information coming out of Kemet. As long as I've been on the manifest, they've been finding new information. So I don't want to get sidetracked going into that, but just know that we're not talking about a bunch of idol worship going on here. Just look at these things as different expressions of the same divinity, but different functions of that divinity. And you would have to know what Ta represents in order to know what that function is. Ta had to deal with the beginning and creation and so forth and so on. So, okay, we can see how HUHI would also be a title that would be applied to Ta. What function? Ta is one who commits life into being, who commits creation into being. He's also referred to as the master builder of creation. This is some of the terminology they give. Now, these are characteristics that's normally given to who we call the Most High God, right? So let me go on. Atum Ra. And this is very important too. Atum Ra, dealing with Atum alone. Atum, is said to be one who was produced, from the divine self and aided in bringing creation into being. Another function. Actually where they would get, the scientists get the concept of the atom from, the Atom. You see, I always like to break it down universally and make it simple and say Atum, Allah, the universal mind. Or Atom, Allah, the original mind. You see, we can look at it that way and we can see how this fit exactly into what I'm stating. So this is the way the Kemites would have taught it, because this you getting into what we would call elements now when you're talking about Atum. Ra being light, not just some sun disk being worshipped, and praised and so forth and so on. No, they reverence the sun. You see, they wasn't bowing down and worshiping. The worship of the sun came by the foreign invaders who came in later and usurped the throne and took over, and that's where all that came from, mostly with your Hyksos dynasties and so forth and so on. And they brought foreign god worship into Kemet and everything. But all of this was also a divine appointment. If you go into it, Isaiah 19 and read it, you'll see what happened to Kemet. But you also see that after everything they went through, the Most High said he was going to smite Kemet and he was going to heal Kemet. And Israel was even named as the third among Kemet. So keep all that in mind as well. He also said he was going to send a savior to them. Kemet, not Israel. We know who was supposed to deliver them, but it was supposed to be a savior sent to them in Isaiah 19, which a lot of our Israelite family like to deny, but you can't deny a particular portion of the law of Yahweh, or Yahuwah, or whatever the case may be, and still say you following the law in totality. So Atum Ra, Asa is another name. Ra represents divine light. Asa represents the first divine personification of truth the spirit, everything that was good. He represented that original being of purity, so to speak. That's all Osar represented. So Osar, they call him Osiris. It says Nep HUHI, which means the Lord, everlasting. Osar was given this a special title, meaning he was a representative of God on earth. Didn't mean that he was the supreme reality. Now, he may have been supreme in the sense that he was the most perfect in his particular time, because Osar was the one who civilized Kemet. But to the extent of the real nature, the Most High, the nature of the Most High was basically himself having that sovereign power. And he gave power by means of the manifestation of what is known as the Neteru. You see, and the Neteru, are synonymous with the Elohim in the teachings of what a lot of people like to call the Torah and so forth and so on. That's another measure. So Osar being given this special attribute, Lord, everlasting, so to speak. It says, the everlasting Lord, it says, or as the supreme one, self-existing, and eternal God, which each of these three deities represented in turn. So they basically combine, all of the definitions of what these names represented, and basically showed how they was expressed, we can say through a particular entity in creation, though coming from different aspects. It's just like the sun. When it shines, its rays. If this sun shines upon a window that's shaped and it has different colors and prisms, that light gonna come through that red in one particular color scheme, and then it's gonna come through green in one, then it might come through yellow in one, but it's still the same light. So look at the spirit as manifesting itself just as the light would shine, through many different shades of a prism, but yet being one. We can look at that as how God manifests himself in creation. He manifested himself, in the cosmos. He manifests himself in everything that you see that has life. When we say he manifested himself, we're not talking in the way of, now you worship that. We're saying that the same life, a holy breath that's in us, is the breath that sustained creation. That's what I'm saying. So, nevertheless, it's everlasting Lord, they say, or as the supreme one, self-existing, all these attributes, an eternal God. Which of these three deities represented in turn as one divine dynasty succeeded another in the Egyptian religion? In other words, at particular times, there were different attributes that the people embraced as far as dealing with the Creator. For example, some particular dynasty may say, well, we recognize the God as the God of love. Then the next one may say, we recognize God as the God of truth. We recognize him as peace. We recognize him as freedom. Dynasties going on, coming forth with what they can recognize as the highest ideal of the supreme being. And this is how they was able to see it, you see? But he was still the same supreme being. So in other words, it said an eternity of existence was imagined by the Egyptians as ever coming or becoming. Hence, ever coming or ever becoming was a mode of imagining the eternal being. You see? So in other words, again, as man unfolds, his God unfolds. As the intelligence of man evolves, his comprehension of God evolves. You see? The supreme reality and so forth and so on, right? And we using that term God because that's what most of our people identify with, even after having given the definition as we gave it earlier. It says, thus the one God as their HUHI, it say, was not only he who is forever as the Father, but it say also he who becomes, or he who comes forever as the Son. Now, we don't want you to get to thinking like this is dealing with some aspects of going into making the Creator again a physical entity and so forth and so on. And all this is saying is that spiritually, the great God fathers creation. You see, spiritually, the great God manifests itself through creation. So if he fathers creation, and if he say Asar came forth, then Kemetically they would say, okay, well, this was the son of Ra. You see? Not to be taken as if he had some type of conjugal relations and gave birth to a physical son. It's metaphysics involved with that type of terminology. And even in the Piscean records, it tells those who are Christians, that none of them should even say that the brother of Jesus or Yahushua is the son of God without knowledge. You see, so more it attains to the S-U-N than the S-O-N. You see, this is a Kemetian way. And though I'm reading from Massey's material here, you see me making corrections along the way, So it says, this visible mode of continuity by means of coming naturally involve becoming, according to the Egyptian doctrine of Khepra. It say, Khepra is the beetle. You would often see the head of the beetle upon the body of the human, and all of this is all symbolic. It say, which includes ever evolving, ever transforming, ever perpetuating, ever becoming. That's what the beetle represents. It represents eternity. The scarab beetle. It says under the one word, Khepra, it say, thus the name of an eternal, self-existent being who is, and they use the terminology of the Tetragrammaton again here, in Hebrew can be traced as HUHI, the name for the one eternal, ever-living, everlasting God as Egyptian. So they said up here earlier that this name, when they went to the root of it, has no root linguistic or tie, so to speak, to Hebrew language, but it's actually tied to the Kemetian or Egyptian language. It says, and now for the first time, we can distinguish the one name, again, Tetragrammaton, whatever you want to call it, Yod, He, Wav, Yahweh, whatever, it says, from the other. It says, if only, and that's just the Yod, that's same thing we were speaking of earlier. It says, if only in Egyptian, on Egyptian ground, it say with variants, which is all, Al, or Ahi, and others, it says it's also an Egyptian word. It says, but with no linguistic relationship to the word Hu. Il is likewise the name of the Egyptian god. It says, as Imhotep, he who comes with peace. It says, who was primarily the son of Ta. It says, and who was repeated in the code of Atum Re as Neferatum, or Nefertum. And we're going to show you something about Nefertum in the end of this particular video. So, this broadcast. So it says, in fact, Atum Ra is both HUHI and Il. It says, as the one God living in truth, the Father manifesting as ever coming Son, who was Ilsa, the son of Ilsas, in the coat of On. It says, all that was ever represented to the Jewish mind by the name of Ihu, or HUHI, right? You see? Now, Ihu, if you were to place the Y there, HWH, you have Yahweh, right? Or Yahuwah, Yod, He, Wav, He, however you want to say it. Now, if you reverse that, you have HUHI. You see? Now, we're going to show you a demonstration of this in a minute. But I just wanted to go through this carefully just to give you a little insight on the measure. And I'm going to show you my research that goes a little further into this. Now I want to go into dealing with. Actually, I have a. Let me make sure. Yes, sir. Peace and love, brother. Hawk L. I just seen you, brother. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, I'm going back and forth. Let me do this right here. I want to make sure that I actually have this up. What in the world? Let me see here. There's people here. Moors with L's on their name. Got some. I'm gonna have to go through here and clean house on my computer. Okay. Here we go. So I want to go right here. Now I actually had this up here the other day. I posted it with the same article that I had up here. And I was showing the people the expression, of Ia, who was also mentioned, because that's the root from which the word Jah and Yah come from right there. You see, the J is manifested from the I, you see, and then that actually came from the Y and so forth. So you have the name Yah. They actually mention that in the Bible too, the name Jah, Yah, and so forth and so on. But Yah is a Comedian name as well, actually linked to that same name that we was referring to earlier. But what does all of this have to do, Yahuwah, HUHI, what does all of that have to do with Allah and its similarities in being the same? I'm going to show you something here. Now, in Sufism, you would often see them use this terminology in reference to the Creator. Right here, Hu, Ahua, you see, meaning he, right? So this is basically Hebrew and Arabic, right? You will see it here, Hua, and it says the pronoun used with Allah or God and is used as a name of God, Allahu. You see? So Hua means there is nothing but he. Now, if you go back to the Comedian history that I was showing earlier, and I was just pointing out here, it was talking about who he as being the eternal, God, the eternal existing, the ever living one. So that coincides with this Sufi terminology here, Hua. You see, and sometimes you'll see Yah placed in the front of it, which is Yahuwah. You see? So the term Yahuwah is used in Arabic as well as in what they like to call Hebrew. And this is actually the glyph of, Hua right here. That's the H and that's the W right there in the Arabic. So, we can already see that there's a connection between these two names, Yahuwah and Hua, right? Yahweh, you see, Yod He Wav He. Nobody can deny that. Not in their right mind, they would. Now, hatred will make you do a lot of crazy things. But the general opinions of men will never alter the nature of truth. So when you come here, this is another article. It's coming from it's actually called Egypt in Eden, a book called Egypt in Eden. I forgot the author's name. It'll come back to me in a little bit. But here, he was discussing the origin of the name that had to do with Alah and Alah. And watch what he states. Now notice the name of the book has to do with Egypt being in Eden. In fact, it say this task can be rather neatly achieved, and he just continuing on from a particular measure. I just cut it off where the last period was here. It says, in fact, this task can be rather neatly achieved because the other eye of Horus. His left eye was known as the dark eye, and this represented the moon. But in the Egyptian, the moon was known as Yeah, Yah, right? It say, which was surprising as it may seem, appears to be the second syllable in Elah or Allah. Now, this is why Europeans, when they begin to teach in these particular ways, instead of them understanding, an special quality or a potency or a power or a divinity, that is actually given the station of operating, on a particular solar or lunar body, they begin to try to speak of these lunar and solar bodies as the creator himself. And that's where they end up going wrong. But we here to correct all of that. And this is why they get the lie, say, well, Allah is a moon god and all this other foolery. Because they connect this with Alat, which is not the same. Alat and Allah is not the same, two different words. But nevertheless, that's a whole nother story. I debated somebody on that and definitely was the victor. So it says the moon was known as It say, and then they broke it down as Yah or Yah. And you seen the image that I showed you, from the comedian standpoint here, right? This is the way they depicted this in ancient Kemet. You see the moon here and that there as a headdress and so forth. And so that's the eye of Ra, Heru right there. Problem is, instead of the Europeans seeing this as a divine personification of the creator working through a human being at a particular time, they say no, they was worshiping the physical idol. So that's foolery. We'll get into that in a little bit. So nevertheless, it goes on and it states, it says, in which the case the two eyes of Horus would have been called Ar, which is A-R, right? It say or E-R. And then he shows that this was interchangeable with the letter L, which is Al or L. So it's not strange, even if you deal with the word R, a word that deals with R in it, they get it from the roll sound. That's where they see the unity between the R and the L. Arah, 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 Arah. You can hear Allah in there if you really demonstrate it, that particular way. It says representing the sun. It's saying Yah representing the moon. So what they are saying is that, the eye of Heru, or the eyes of Heru, one represented the sun, one represented the moon. And so you're going to see the connection this particular one was demonstrating here. He said, of course, when these two terms are combined, a small miracle occurs. And the resulting name for the two eyes of Horus is Elah or Alah. So he combined the two words Al and Ah together, and then you see Elah or Allah, right? Now this is the word that was adopted into the Hebrew language, and it actually means the Most High God. And they actually put an H in front of it, an A and an H in front of it actually, in certain transliterations. It says, so the Hebrew God Elah and the Arabic God Allah, see, he equated Allah with being Allah, double L, you see, are nothing more than the Egyptian reference to the two eyes of Horus, or in other words, the sun and the moon combined. This was his breakdown on this particular measure, right? He said, this is why the Christian patriarchs and apostles are always depicted with the eyes, parts of the image of the sun behind their heads, or the halo. He said, it is also the reason, it say, for the predominant image in of Islam, the crescent moon. This is his own thesis on this now. It says, not fully understanding the reasoning behind the God name, Elah or Allah. It says, it would appear that each of these belief systems has picked out and highlighted a portion of his name's true meaning. It says, and still uses it It say in the modern era as an icon of their deity. Indeed, it is not uncommon to find an image of a star inside the Islamic crescent moon. And if this star is taken to be a solar icon, then the symbology of the God named Allah would be complete. And he's basically referring to the same thing that we was talking up here, the sun and the moon. So he's saying that this represents Allah, right? And that's his breakdown of it. You know, partially he has some credence to what he's saying, but on another measure, he's just scratching the surface, so to speak. But we're going to take you a little further beneath the surface, you know, in this particular portion that we bringing on the manifest. So here's a particular measure, and this was extracted from the Concise Dictionary of Egyptian Archaeology. And this was dealing with Ra. It is said that, well, we're going to quote it. It say, I, the god Ra, tired of ruling over the disobedient people of the earth, retired to the sky. Right? It say, where he created for himself a place to dwell and rule over. And there he created a field of rest, Alah, the great field of growing crops, the field of Ahlah. You see? And if you read it on, it's speaking of the Book of Dead, describing and says that upon the death of the human body, this is the location of the newly formed soul. And it is here that they will spend their time harvesting divine crops. You see, the field is surrounded by a wall of iron, which has, and that's your golden gates, you know, of your paradise, right? It say it is traversed by a river. The barley grows to a height of 7 cubits. It says Ahluh. It say has also been compared to the Elysium fields in Greek mythology. In other words, the Greeks identify with their little Elysium fields with being that of Egypt, because we know the Kemetian teaching came first. But nevertheless, Ra is said after he got tired of hard-headed, mean, stiff-necked Kemites during that time, he withdrawed himself, you know, basically from the people on the earth and went into this field of peace. Now, this is no different than somebody that's tired of dealing with some fools and they say, all right, I'm finna go into the mountains. You know, I'm going into a state of seclusion. I need some time to myself, right? This is the same type of demonstration that was brought forth here, right? Same measure. We, even in the Grand Quran, it said the earth is spacious enough for you to find a place where you can get you some peace. I'm paraphrasing it basically. But that's what it says in the Quran. You know, it even says it in the Moorish Holy Quran. You know, when man's life sums are pressing hard upon it, you know, it tell him about finding that quiet place. And there he can hear the silent voice of Allah speaking within. So in other words, this is basically the first act of a meditative retreat being demonstrated here. But in this meditative retreat, Ra went into the dwelling place known as Allah. So Kemetically, we can say Allah was a state of being. It was a state of existence. And it's very key that we understand this right here. It was a state of being. Now, Ra represents the divine light. So when you see divine light withdraw itself away from the world, so to speak, then the world is left in utter darkness. You see? And so if he withdrawed himself from the world, the light withdrawed itself from the world and left the disobedient basically to the destruction of themselves, then we can understand, you know, why things begin to unfold as it unfolded when it came to the Kemetian Empire and so forth and so on. But nevertheless, he himself, the light, was in the state of peace. And we're going to show you what we was able to find in our own research. And if you've seen me demonstrate, you already know where I'm going. But I'm more trying to reach out to those who may not be familiar, right? So here's another measure here. They give also the word again, Ahlah, right? And the variations of the field of peace or the plains of peace in the religion of the ancient Egyptians, Ahlah, the field of peace, was a field of peacefulness reserved for the souls of the redeemed. All you got to do is think about in the Grand Quran when it talks and it says that Allah say, "Come unto me, you soul, that's well content," and so forth and so on. And that's the whole key, according to the teachings of Islam, that the soul becomes, at peace. You see, that's what we all say. Some people think they don't get peace until you die, so they say rest in peace. But in all actuality, you can rest in peace while you still in the body. All you got to do is think pure, think clean, and then you are in the presence of Allah. You in the existence of Allah. You in the state of Allah. See, this is the way the Sufis demonstrate, the Sufi adepts, who also received their teachings from ancient Kemet. See, this is the Moorish mysticism that we're talking about here. You see? You ain't gonna get these measures out here like I'm giving them to you nowhere else, not straightforward like this. And you ain't getting charged for them. I'm giving it to you for free. So it say it was located in one of the 4 sections of Amenti. It say in the underworld. Now, underworld, as they like to translate it, ain't got nothing to do with something under the ground. Underworld actually exists in the cosmic realm. But that's a whole nother measure. We can deal with that at another time. It says similar to the Elysium fields, which they made a comparison again, to those that the Greeks tried to adopt. They're comparing, their Elysium fields to Allah, which the Greeks did get basically all of their stuff from the Kemites. So it just had their own way of expressing. It said, here the god Horus dwell waiting the time for this return to the earth when he would reestablish the ring of the gods and restore the world to its original glory. So we know this place known as Allah, the field of peace, is a very exalted place in Kemetian teaching, because Heru is said to be in that particular place. And for people who don't know who Heru is known as Horus, the son of Asa, who defeated his brother Set, who basically killed, Asa and so forth and so on. It's deeper history behind that, but, Heru. Listen to the term Ruh and Ra, Heru. You see? And you see also the terms that deal with Ruh and Ruh, which is spirit. That's simply the expression of Heru. The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. Now, this is my chart and breaking these things down from a Quranic perspective. Carefully, not carelessly. You see, this was done carefully. And I wanted to go forth with everything that was already in the book. So you had Ra here is the root of the Arabic word Nara, which is, Nara is the word that gives birth to the word Nur, which means light. You see, you got Ru'Allah, Ra'Allah, who, you see, Ra'Allah, right? So Ru'Allah, Ra'Allah, you see? Now, in the Quran, the Grand Quran, brought by Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, you would often see that he speaks, when he brings surahs on the manifest, every surah has what I like to call the heart of the particular surah. So if it's called the cow, then you know it's something in there that's relative to a cow. If it's called the spider, it's something in there relative to the spider, and it's a grand lesson to be given. This particular surah is called Al-Nur, which is surah 24. And listen to what it states. It says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. And the parable of his light is as if there were a niche, and within it a lamp. Now, if you look here, and we gave you this example so you can see it. You see that there's a niche, and within it a lamp there, right? Then it states, the lamp enclosed in a glass, the glass as it were a brilliant star, lit from a blessed tree. And you see me put this symbolism right here as well for you, right? Because we're trying to make it plain. So it says, lit from a blessed tree, an olive, neither of the east nor of the west. That means that this light, that basically caused this special star to shine bright and be enlightened, so to speak. It was neither limited to the east nor the west. In other words, this is universal light, right? It says, whose oil is well nigh luminous, though fire scarce touch it. Those fire barely touch it. This oil is very luminous, which is symbolic to wisdom, spirit, all that good stuff. You name it. Whatever you can think of good, you can look at that as being luminous. All the attributes and characteristics of the love, the whatever you want to think about. It says, light upon light. Allah doeth guide whom he will to his light. Allah doeth set forth parables for men, and Allah doeth know all things. So this is a parable that was given. And notice the parable was given speaking of a niche, and within it a lamp, and then it being enclosed in a glass in the form of a brilliant star being lit by a blessed tree. Now, we're going to go on first. It says in 24 verse ayat 36, it says, lit is such a light in houses which Allah has to honor for celebration in them of his name. In them he is glorified in the mornings and the evenings again and again. So we know that this is not talking about this glorified Allah, this particular symbolic expression that I have here. And this is not talking about a literal house here when it say lit is such a light in houses which Allah permitted to be raised. It's talking about man himself being the temple of the great God Allah. So lit is this light of divinity in the house, in the temple, in the house. The highest thing is the attic up there. You can store things in the attic. It's the same thing with the head on the body. You can store wisdom in the attic. You see? But it says, which Allah have permitted to be raised to honor for celebration in them of his name. So we was raised to honor. Man in his purest state was raised to honor for celebration within himself, praising the great God Allah. Within itself, all we got to do is find that quiet place. We ain't got to go into no literal building. Nothing wrong with going to the mosque if that's where you want to go. But you are a walking temple. You learn that in the Piscean record. No, you're not yet a temple of God, and the spirit of God dwelleth within you, which temple that you are. And you taught not to defile this special temple as well, right? That's basic instructions of the Piscean records, or what they call the Bible. So nevertheless, if this is the case, he permitted man to be raised to honor and celebration in them of his name, because his name is pretty much expressed through the limbs of man. And that ain't saying that Allah is the physical man in that aspect, but saying that Allah is using the physical body as a vehicle to express, his attributes. In other words, in order for you to know love, he had to send a man to you that was demonstrating love. In order for him to send, you some peace, he had to demonstrate a man, coming forth and allow him to come forth and bring you peace. And the same thing is with any other attribute. You don't receive freedom, justice, and none of that right there in the form of spook, something that you can't see. If you waiting on a justice that you can't see, then you in trouble. So justice has to come, or you have to know your help when it come in the person of somebody. You see? In other words, it's still a law, but he using somebody as a vessel. So he allows man to be a vessel of glorification, you see? And that's through his arm, leg, arm, head. You see, man's arm, leg, his vessel is what Allah uses to teach people. He uses, man to demonstrate a whole lot of things. Save nations, build nations, even destroy and smite nations. You see, it's a measure in the Bible where it speaks where the great God say, I made you my battle axe. You see, in the Quran, it say it was not you that slew them, it was I that slew them, or whatever the case may be. In other words, just pay attention to the context and the way things are demonstrated. But I'm just trying to make it plain for those who have no knowledge of these things. That way you don't have no excuses, to have it wrong after this. You see, and I'll let you do your own research. But trust me, everything that I'm saying, I done researched this for over 25 some odd years, 30 years, doing this stuff here. So, notice I have here the exalted ray. And you see down here you have Ra and Ra, right? You have Raha and Ruh. This is the root word. Raha is the root word from which Ruh derives. The word Ruh means spirit. Ra and Ra. See? You see that this is actually connected to the word Ra. So now we can see the connection that was being made earlier when we was reading to you, but we'll get into that later. So here, if you look at this breakdown that I have on this particular expression here with the lamp, you see the aleph, you see the lam, aleph, ha, arm, leg, arm, head, right? Man being the vessel. The light, ra, or ray, man is spirit clothed with soul. You see, the spirit represents the fire, and he's clothed with soul. That's the niche. You see? And the lamp is, all that's part and parcel of the same measure. But it says the lamp, ba, which means spirit as well, right? You see, then you have niche, ka, which is soul. You see, then you have the glass, which is sahu, and I call that flesh divine. You see? So this would be a representation of a spiritual body, as far as dealing with the way it was described here. But really, we can call it the aura, because you can be physical and have a spiritual body if your aura shines through your physical vessel. But that has to do with whatever level of vibration you on. So this is the measure dealing with the light, and it's not strange that the word that deals with nura, a nara, can be linked back to Ra. And we also know, if we know anything about the teachings of Kemet, that this is special word, and all of the words, mostly in the Arabic and what they like to call so-called Hebrew, it mostly derived from Kemet as well. So that's a whole nother measure. Hold up. Let me make sure. Okay, so yes, sir. Islamism and gratitude, grand man. I'm back and forth with you. I'm just taking my time or whatever because I don't want to lose nobody in this particular measure here. So I'll be back and forth with you. Yes, sir. Islam. Okay, so right here, what I did, and we seen how we broke down the name, Allah earlier, and we talked about, the actual state of existence. You see, we actually have the expression of, Yah here. You see, Yah, right? So in the dictionary, of the Egyptian language, according to the European Budge, and don't let these symbols distract you because that's not the actual language. That was actually used to hide the language. They transliterated these things here, and translated this here from Demotic and Hieratic. That's the real language of the Egyptian teaching, Hieratic and Demotic. I don't care what nobody else told you or what they saying, and we're going to prove that in a little bit of time, but that ain't to be done here now. So, nevertheless, the definition is the name of a god, which is Ar. Now, you see the R was interchangeable with the L in the last measure that I brought to you earlier. Now, if you change that R to L, it becomes Aul. And then if you add Ah, which is also there, you have All Ah. You see? And we're going to get into that in a minute. Aul, Aullah, right? Ah, which means to rejoice. Ah, right? Now, I was talking about, I already gave you the definition of Ahlah according to the Comedian. That's the same definition. And I talked about the Sufi adepts. They teach that the Aullah, and this deals with actually the people of Allah, their status, sometimes the physical external body, Zahir, which is the external, Zahir means external, of the Ahullah is so weak that even if a mosquito were to bite them, they would be distressed and disturbed. However, their internal condition, which is the spiritual self, the inner man, it says such that it contains the seven heavens within itself. Therefore, one cannot truly estimate the power and the vastness of the internal condition, batin, of Aullah. It says in terms of the level of their physical beings, they are with the rest of creation. But in terms of the level of their souls, they are constantly in the presence of Allah. Remember what I was telling you about Ra? You see, going into that place, that field of peace known as Allah. Remember what I was saying about Allah being a state of existence, a state of being? This is what the Sufis refer to as being constantly in the presence of Allah. They call it the remembrance of Allah, right? It says, so why then would their souls not be able to encompass the seven heavens? It says the average intellect is not capable of truly recognizing the status, position, and states and conditions of those that are in the proximity of Allah. You see, so Ahullah, that status, Allah, right? That's the true state of bliss. That's being in a state of fruition. Well, now you have become the message of love, in the manifest. And I was showing here how in the dictionary, the R and the L is interchangeable. Just so where you see where I got that from. Although you have people that try to refute even that, but that also can be refuted, and I have. That's another expression of Ta, because this expression of Ta, and that's also the same expression, yeah, it's the same one, but just different expression. In Kemet, you'll see that. So you see the R being interchangeable, and you see the two A's, and you see L. See it? See the replacement here? So if you look at that, you will notice Aruh, second Aruh. This is where I got and that's the lion right there. You see it crouching. That's the letter L. See the L? Okay, so just so you see where I got it. So it's Ahlu, which we read about earlier. Ahru, same measure, right? And you see A-A-A-L-U, which is Ahru. You see? Same measure here. The R would be, in this case, the open mouth symbol, which is also the L, right? So then you have Al, which is Ahru, A-A-R-R, Al and Allah. This is the God of the field of reeds, or what they call the field of peace. It's the same measure, Ahlah, right there. You see, it's a state of existence, a state of being. You see, this is what it means to worship Allah, and be in the presence of Allah. But I'm just showing you the Kemetic roots of this, right? And I ain't done yet. Now, this is another measure that confirms what we was reading earlier, too. We went back to that particular book, Egypt and Eden. It says the all-embracing nature of this explanation with the Egyptian names for the sun and the moon, it says Al and Ah combining and becoming Elah or Allah, and thus explaining the peculiar plurality of a single God indicates that It is highly likely that this was the origin of the Hebrew name Alah and the Arabic god named Allah, in which case the prime god of the Quran and early parts of the book of Genesis was none other than Horus. You see, Heru is say who is a solar deity, was often regarded as being Ra himself. It say again in the Egyptian heritage of the Torah, Quran, it say is being laid bare, and we can clearly see the beginnings of an Egyptian story emerging. So this particular author here again is identifying, and this is his breakdown, but he's taking it back to what he can identify with as a connection with the name Alah and the word Allah as being rooted in Kemet. This is his breakdown. I just showed you mine, so this is not something, and there's many other scholars that demonstrate the same. That's actually the same one I read. But he also stated here, now this is key what we get. He say, however, in the Torah, Old Testament, more often than not, he say, it is the plural of Elah or Allah that is used, and this is pronounced as Allahim or Elohim, right? Elohim. It say this plurality has often been an embarrassment for what is supposed to be a monotheistic religion. Speaking of Judaism, it say, but it is a curiosity that may eventually explain the true origins of this name. For I rather think that the root of the name Elah or Elohim for God is slightly more esoteric and definitely more Egyptian than the authorities would like to admit. So this is another scholar, like Gerald Massey, this is his own breakdown, but he's identifying this word Allah, which would be in what they call modern box Hebrew, and the word Allah, which would be in Arabic, he taking it back to Kemet. I just showed you again my breakdown, but this is his particular approach. Now here's a measure from some of the mystic teachings of Judaism. And they were speaking of, and this is another author, by the way. And it was dealing with the history of the name Allah. It said, in my youth, I was instructed to regard Al, the great God of the Bible, as my divine father. That glorious, ineffable deity assumed likewise the title of Allah, right? It say that omnipresent and universal Jehovah, that's the name coming back to that Yahuwah, HUHI. So it's comparing Allah and HUHI or Yahuwah, however you want to say it, as being one and the same. So we can see in many different areas, many scholars see or view, Allah, Yahuwah, Allah, however you want to say it, as one reality. But it's something more remarkable about Allah, because this name is not just limited to going back into the Kemetian area or going into what they call Hebrew and already existing in Arabic. But we're going to show you some more things that, definitely stand out and most worthy of note. So it says that omnipresent universal Jehovah, who in the vast series of his theophanies or divine manifestations, they were saying the same thing in the Egyptian breakdown, the many coming forth, the many manifestations, of HUHI. It say revealed himself in the form of Rashid, or the divine Adam, not the physical man. It say, or the first image of similitude. In other words, this was the spiritual Adam, not the physical man. So it say this divine protoplastic Adam, protoplastic having to do with the first form, spiritual expression. It says, whom the Jews call Kadmon Adam, or prime man. Some people say original man. It says the divine idea or exemplar of humanity. He is the character and express image of God's person, the divine true man who is the Lord from heaven, displaying his pre-existing and glorified humanity in the periodic ages of the world. This Allah, this Rashid or divine Adam, also turned Adonai, Messiah in Christ, and this is his breakdown, right? We also know Christ is not even a man. It actually tells you Christ or the Holy Spirit is mentioned in the Quran as well. And that's dealing with the Ruh. So if you connect Ruh back to Ra and so forth and so on, you can already get that. But it says, who is in the image of God and a quickening spirit, is reported by tradition to have written a book called the Rashid, or the Sefer Alah, concerning the creation, which forms the exordium of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. This Adam Kadmon, created in the image of Allah, produced, according to tradition, a human natural Adam, and breathed into his nostrils the inspiration of life, and thus the natural Adam became a living soul, an animal, right? So in other words, this spirit man that was created by the great God, has his image, known as, Cadman Adam, or as they call him, he was given that spiritual title as being a vessel of Allah. He is said to be the one that the physical Adam is made in the image of. So Adam, the physical Adam, is not made in the image of the supreme being. The physical Adam is actually made in the image of this divine vessel, Kadmon Adam. You see? This Adam Kadmon, created in the image of Allah, produced, according to tradition, a human natural Adam. So it was Adam Kadmon who was made in the image of this special Allah. You see? And this is coming from a site that deal with biblical Judaism, right? And there's a teaching in regards to dealing with, Adam Kadmon and all that there. I've been on this right here for some time now. But that's a whole nother measure. I'll get into it. I'm going to touch some more on that in a little bit, though, but I ain't going to give a whole measure on it because I'm dealing strictly with the name Allah and tracing it through these different sources. Now, this is actually an excerpt from the Piscean records, or the version of the Bible I have over here. Had it for about 30 years or whatever the case may be. And this was the definition given to that same word, Eloah. Alah is going from the same root. It means the mighty one. It says another singular title occurring some 50 times is Eloah. The word derives from Allah, meaning to worship, to adore, and thus presents God as one supreme object of worship. Thou art a God ready to pardon, gracious, and merciful. And they're showing all the areas where it's found at. In the book of Job, they're saying that this name Allah was used. You see, throughout the whole book. So that's a whole nother measure right there. And if you look at it, when it says it means to, the word derives from Allah, which means to worship and adore, it takes you right back to the same definition that I was given here when I was speaking of meaning to rejoice, and so forth and so on. The name of a God, it deals with worship, powerful. It also should bring light to the portion where in the Quran where Allah told the angels to bow down, or prostrate before Adam. And this is because Adam, not dealing with the physical side of him, but the spiritual expression of that man was a portion from God himself, the spirit, the ruh. So he was telling them to prostrate, from that aspect. And so when Iblis refused and he said, I ain't going to do it, you created me from fire, him from clay, he was missing the point because he was looking at just the physical part and also you disobedient. But the measure has to deal with more than anything that recognize that portion that I have breathed, that ruh, that spirit, recognize that in that one, not his exterior, and a lot of time that's where we get in trouble, right now with our own self. We get caught up on external things as opposed to internal things. And that's why the Europeans were not able to really properly translate and transliterate these teachings because they are caught more up on materialism than the spiritual essence behind the matter. They don't care how things work, in the underlying aspect. They only care scientifically about what they can say is concrete. And anything else, they don't believe, okay, well, that got no meaning, but ain't no bearing on that. So that's a Western way of thinking. So anyway, this is a chart I created here. The importance of this chart is very key. Now, this is the original language that the so-called modern Hebrew box Hebrew was adopted from. This is Proto-Sinaitic, Proto-Canaanite. This is my chart. I created it to give some clarity. You see me talking about Adam Kadmon a few minutes ago as being the spirit Adam. This is the man that was made in Genesis. You see, chapter 2, verses 4 through 7. Because he was created by God himself. He said he breathed forth the breath of life and man became a living soul. Well, this Elohim, because he took on that form of Elohim as well, this Adam Kadmon, he was the same one that took part in the creation of this Adam. That's why I say Adam, the physical Adam, was made in his image. You see, he was one of the Elohim, you see, as well. So Adam Kadmon was made in the image of God himself. God created him. This Adam here was made by the Elohim. I've been teaching this, and that's why, instability, inconstancy, weakness, insufficiency, misery, these deal with the fall of man. That's an inverted star. You see, all that came with man falling. So that Adam and Eve degree has to do with the physical, but Ish and Isha, from a spiritual state, this is the original spirit man and spirit woman, who I identified as being indigenous Muslim because he was also the first, human being as well manifested from this special union before this one even came into being. You see, that's a whole nother story. That's talking about the pre-Adamites and so forth and so on. So anyway, you see Atik Yamin here, which is the Ancient of Days. Now, if you know anything about Daniel chapter 7, verse 9, it described the Ancient of Days with manly characteristics. This is just the way they chose to do it. He had hair like wool. He set his throne down. That's a whole nother measure. So when we say that man was made in the image of God, that's a grand demonstration. It ain't strange, especially if he had hair like wool, but we ain't going to go there right now. Now, this is what I'm getting at. This is the same Tetragrammaton, just used with the more ancient script here. You see the Y, you see the H, you see the W, you see the H. Notice you see two expressions of human figures, so to speak, or the figure or the form. Looks like actually the symbol that I showed you earlier, but with outstretched arms here of Ta. That's just something to make note of real quick since we do it. So almost like one has lifted their arms up. That's what it looked like. It looks like Ta has exalted his arms. And if he was demonstrating that, and going into a prayer position, that's one of the Akbars. You say Allahu Akbar, you raise your hand, and then you go into Qiyam and place your right palm over your left hand. You see, but that's a whole nother measure. We ain't going into that right now. If somebody was dealing with a Salat expression, even Salat can be traced back to Kemet. These are sun salutes on a whole nother level. I know this may be some hard truth for some of our people to swallow, but if you go and do the research, you'll see exactly what's being stated. When I say sun salutation, we ain't talking about worshiping the sun neither. Talking about the divine light. But anyway, so notice you see Yod, Hey, Wav, Hey, right? Now backwards, you got HUHI. Now we talked about HUHI in the beginning of this particular broadcast and showed you that HUHI was the same as Yahweh. Same measure. But there's something more interesting about this special name. If you look at these two letters, this letter here and that letter, which is Y and H, you see that in the name Ish and Isha, Ish and Isha, which is basically the same thing, you will see that these two letters, the Yod and the Hey, is what connect these two names to each other. That's the Yod and that's the Hey. But these other two letters are the same. You see? That's the Aleph. You see? And then you go into the S. See that the S there? Aleph S, Aleph S. You got hey. This is the only thing that's different. But yet these two letters are connected to the name of the creator himself, HUHI, Yahweh. He who is. You see? Now, when you come down here, you see Alihim. Right here in the name Alihim, you see again the same letters. That Yah, it's all in there, right? Now, that same element connected to the Elohim, connected to the original spirit, man and woman, going back to God, it's unity in that, but you can't connect the name Adam and Eve, to these special names. You see, so that in itself is a grand draw in and of itself, but that's a whole nother measure. That's just some hidden truths behind the name. There's the Tetragrammaton, as you seen it earlier, right here in this pentad of this star here. That's the Yod He Wav He, which is the same as this. This is more modern. That's the ancient form of it. That's box Hebrew. You see? So this star is actually in the form of expression of man. An image, Tetragrammaton. You see? Now, so when you go into the book and it say in the beginning was the word was, it's actually supposed to say with God. I see I left my W out there, but that's all good. In the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. And now you can understand what's being said when you look at the symbolism that's being demonstrated here. You see? In the beginning was the word, right? HUHI, Yahuwah, right? All this really going back to being synonymous with the same being known in the Arabic language, known in what they would call also box Hebrew or ancient Hebrew, whichever one of you want to look at it. It's still talking about the same supreme being. You see? Which is also known as Aahla. We showed you that as well in both languages. So everybody can't be lying. So in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. See, this is all a symbol of, that expression of what we would call the Atum Kadman, the Kadmanite expression here. Notice this is the word. The word is with God, the word was God. All of this is symbolic of these things. You can even see this tree of life up here. Notice how it's in the same shape of a DNA sequencing. That remind me of Nova Drew Ali when he said he came to mend the broken wires and connect them to the higher powers. DNA, NDA, Nova Drew Ali, divine nature of Allah. DNA, divine nature in action. Okay, so here's the box Hebrew, modern Hebrew, as they like to call it. And notice you see the same dynamic here. Ish, man, Ish, a woman, right? See the two letters? The Yod and the Hey, same measure. Yah. So the common denominator, God is the essence of dealing with this man and this woman, this spirit man and spirit woman. You can't get around it. You see? You see the Aleph here, you see the Shin here. You see? Aleph Shin. But that's a deeper measure. You want to go beyond what you call X and Y chromosomes? Let's get into some spiritual DNA. This is your spiritual X and Y chromosome right here. You see? Yah being right there at the root. Yah, again, goes back to the Kemetian. Yeah. Right down here, right? Don't get to thinking we talking about this right here as an idol god to be worshipped, because that's not what's being said. We're just showing you Kemetically a lot of this stuff is more ancient than what people know. And God has always expressed himself to man through man. You see? Now look at this. This is Allah. Upside down. If you were to flip, this Yahweh name, I would call it right side up, actually. Some people say upside down. But you see Yahweh and Allah. I told you, see, this channel about showing you unity. I'm trying to show you how to bridge the gaps. You see, I'm showing you that all this fussing and this fighting and this cussing and war, has to cease. I'm showing you peace right here. Only the wise gonna be able to embrace this right here and get a drawing out of it. This ain't meant for the weak. You see? Yes, sir. Islam. Yeah. Islam PNF Information History Channel. And I put this out here now at this time of the hour. I tell the people all the time, I'm doing this when they sleep. So yeah. You can't get around this though. That's another expression. Same thing right here. Same measure. Hold up. Yeah, there you go right there. The name Yahweh, right? In reverse right. Upside down. Pressed together. You can't help but see it. It's the same dynamic. Now, what's even more interesting when we deal with this universal name Allah, when you look at the Om symbol in the teachings of Hinduism, look at what happened when you arrange these letters in such a way. The name Allah comes up again. You see, how is this possible? Now, we just showed you Allah, and its relation to what they would call Hebrew and Arabic. We showed it to you in the Egyptian language. Now we're showing it to you in the expression of Sanskrit. And so you mean to tell me that this name ain't more ancient than any other name that you done seen out there? You got to be foolish to deny this, right? We're getting ready to come to a close. This is another one of the same expression, but a different drawing. It says it's all about perspective. In other words, all the way you see the thing. Can't nobody get around that though. When you rearrange this same symbol to Om, which is a symbol of meditation, there it is again, the name Allah. There it is. Same demonstration that we had right over here. It's there. This is the same one, but just more color. You see it. Om and Allah. Powerful. If we can see the unity in that. And so this was another chart that I had actually created a while back. And notice it said, there is no God but the great God. And notice I had a symbol of the Tetragrammaton here, which is also right there. This is the same picture of the other one. I created this one a while ago. And you see the Om symbol here. You see? Sometime Om Mani Padme Hum is what they call it. But anyway, this is one that I put together. I put the little Sikh symbol in there just for the mid section. But you see Alif, Lam, Alif, Ha. That's the letter H. Look at it, look like a little turban, right? So ain't nowhere in the world that you can get around these things. And not only did the creator show a link, continuation between these especially, but every one of these high names that have to do with the supreme reality shaped in the form of a man. Now you tell me that ain't divinely, it ain't divine humor. He put his signature on your being. And then you got people running around here talking about they atheists. They don't believe in the Most High. Come on, man. This is man himself as a representation of the macrocosm. You see, but really, we are a manifestation in the form as being the microcosm of the macro. See, this is universal man. Same thing, macrocosm, micro. There is no God but the great God. That's why you ask the Moors at what time, what name do we sometimes refer to Allah as? and we say the great God. You see? Okay. Here's a measure right here in my going out to close this demonstration. We're going to move a little swift because I want to have this done by at least 30 minutes off this hour. So it says Allah is closer to you than your jugular vein. Now, in order for Allah to be closer to you than your jugular vein, that means that he has to be in the essence of your being. And don't take that the wrong way, my Orthodox family. In other words, his spirit, his ruh, is in you. We call it Ru'Allah. All you got to do is go to the Grand Quran. It's closer to you. You know what your jugular vein, that's your lifeline. Somebody cut that, you die. Same expression here. It's given the same measure here about the jugular vein as well here. It's saying we have already created man and know what his soul whispers to him. And we are closer to him than his jugular vein. To know what your soul whispered to you, this means that there has to be some presence of the great God in the essence of your being, because your soul is a part and partial of your being. This is not saying that God is the soul or housed in the soul or, just laid up there as one supreme reality. And we're saying that he placed a portion of himself within you. Let's look at it like Bluetooth. You know what I'm saying? When you deal with the Bluetooth device, you can connect that device to any device that's Bluetooth pairable. So we can look at the souls of men as symbolically somewhat like a Bluetooth. And it's tuned in to the divinity of the spirit, the frequency of God, so to speak. You see? Look at it that way. Here's a measure that was given by the brother, which is a well-renowned scholar in Islam, Ibn Arabi. It says, Ibn Arabi presupposes the absolute identity of God and man. Al-Jili introduces introduces a subtle difference of the level between God's and man's attributes. Watch what he say. He say, God made this name Allah a miracle man. Right? Remember we was talking about the arm, leg, arm, head. We gave the breakdown on Surah 24. Al-Nur. He made this vessel a mirror for man so that when he looks into it, he knows the true meaning of God. Right? He knows the true meaning of God was, and there was naught or nothing beside him, so to speak. And in that moment, it is revealed to him that his hearing is God's hearing. His sight is God's sight. His speech is God's speech. His life is God's life. His knowledge is God's knowledge. His will is God's will. His power is God's power. And God possesses all these attributes fundamentally. And then he knows that all the aforesaid qualities are borrowed and metaphorically applied to himself, whereas they really belong to God. That's the highest expression of monotheism that one can really gain. So high to where it's dangerous to somebody that may be orthodox and they haven't unfolded into this reality. Because they'll swear you saying that you are the supreme reality, you the most high. You see? If you say that your will is his will, and you say that your life is his life, you say that, all of this power, your hearing and your sight, this is God's speech. A fool would think that you are saying that you are the supreme reality instead of saying you are a vessel for the supreme reality. See, this is Kemetic teaching right here. This is the same thing we was talking about earlier. This is that mysticism. This is the Moorish way. That's why we say when Allah speaks to man, he speaks through man. That's why you hear us use terms such as spirit clothed with soul made in the form of Allah. This is what we're talking about. This is why we say we're not those who are just merely submitting to the will. We don't say that disrespect. We say we are the will. That means that we have conformed to the will of the Most High. And we have become that will in action. If he will love through us, then we demonstrate love. If he will truth, peace, freedom, and justice, then we demonstrate that. You know, that's how we demonstrate. You see, so this name Allah is very powerful and very ancient, as we just established. You know, only a fool would try to refute what was stated here, or somebody that's very unlearned. I had a measure here dealing with what I call the sacred science of the white-clad adept fez, because there's tradition that the fez of the Moors was originally white and it became red, you know, as a result of sacrifices and so forth and so on. Those who died for the cause, and you know, and it said that's where it came from. You know, it said that you know, war took place and all of this or whatever, and that's why they said it became, you know, a symbol. But nevertheless, this symbol of the white fez actually represents pure consciousness. This pure consciousness, symbolically, if we go into what we was demonstrating about being in the proximity of Allah, you know, from a Sufistic standpoint, you know, or just like I was demonstrating from Ibn Arabi, you know, Allah possessing, you know, your being, your person. We know the fez is normally worn upon the head. Now, the difference with this is special white fez degree. We're not dealing with an actual hat. We're talking about a state. Spiritually, this would represent your head is where the throne of God, you know, is seated, so to speak. You see? And so if that's the case, then we know it's 3 degrees of the throne of God. This, a lot of people would like to call this the crown chakra. You see, right there in the center of the head. That's what they call it, you know, all over when you deal with mystic teachings. All the lofty teachings of, you know, Judaism or Islamism, you know, Sufism, you know, Buddhism, they all talk about the throne of the supreme reality. So Islamically, the throne is known in 3 levels. You have divine authority, which the Kursi represent. You have divine power, which the Arsh represent. You have divine sovereignty, which is Istawa. It said that he raised himself, or he rose in a manner that was befitting to himself. He created the 7 heavens and he rose above them. Symbolically, you have 7 heavens within you. See, we was talking about that earlier when we were speaking of the Aahla. We were saying that, you know, man internally has 7 heavens. So if that's the case, and Allah represent he who rose above the 7 heavens, because he was already exalted anyway, you know, this represents the supreme state of consciousness and your will being in tune with the deific will. You see? Divine authority, divine power, divine sovereignty. And it's whole teachings just on these different portions of the throne. I ain't even really went into them. There's whole lectures that can be taught just on these. So Kemetically, you know, you have then what you would call the 1st degree, the 2nd degree, and the 3rd degree. The Ba, the Ka, and the Ak. The Ba represent, you know, the expression of what we would call a divine manifestation. This being the soul as well. Then this actually being the spiritual body. You see, Akaba, Allahu Akbar. You see? And that's Kemet. White mean purity, purity mean God, God mean the rule of the land. And we definitely ain't talking about a white man. It's talking about the thought pattern. That's what Noble Drew Ali was teaching. Now, something deeper, if you look at this image right here, you're probably wondering what it is and what it has to do with that particular measure that we just demonstrated a few minutes ago. And I was actually talking about this earlier to a particular brother. But this is actually a symbol that was supposed to be an expression created, to be what they would call the utopia, or the lost city of Atlantis. You hear this spoken of in different circles. And we find actually that this is not a lost city at all. We find that this city actually existed, but that's a whole nother measure. I'm going to show you some things here. I'm going to give you some keys. Now, this is supposed to be an expression, another expression of the same thing. Now, notice the waterway goes out into the sea, because this would be the sea. Now, where would this be located right now on Earth? It's the same structure. They got many of them if you pull them up. This one here just shows the Atum right here, going out, the porter headed out of that particular structure. You think that don't exist? Let me show you something. And there's a whole video on this. This is called the recat structure, family. It's a little Moorish wisdom right here. This is the recat structure. I'm going to pull that over to the side. And this is off the west coast of Africa. I got other measures that I done demonstrated on this already where I went more into detail. But you see the eccentric circles moving from the center to the outer bounds. These are mud flats where water once existed at, right here off the west coast of Africa. You see? And it's very large. It's a huge area. There's videos out here of one European that actually went out there and went on the area, and it goes for miles and for miles. But nevertheless, it has a particular area that runs off from the recat structure into the ocean. And so the significance of this, the reason why I'm mentioning this right now, see, there it is right there. They got a whole bunch of them up here. So do your research on that yourself. But the reason why I'm mentioning all of this right here is because this symbol became a universal symbol that had to do with enlightenment. You see, this is a symbol of what they would call the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. You see, during the age of enlightenment, it was based, this is the round city of Al-Mansur as well. You see it? You see the quadratic expression? All of this can be took back to what is known as, it's a Coptic symbol. You see it's going in 4 different directions, which is really synonymous with the Dendera in ancient Kemet. And if you don't know what the Dendera is, let me pull that up. Because if I'm using this terminology, I got to make sure, that you have some insight in regards to dealing with it. It's this symbol here, basically, which is where they get their zodiacal calendars from. So the Dendera is a plane sphere chart, basically, that deals with the heavens or whatever in the temple of Dendera. And that's a whole nother measure. But nevertheless, that particular symbol that you can see dealing with the Mansur Mosque, or you deal with Al-Aqsa, and so forth and so on, you can see it moving in all these different directions. Why do you think it was necessary that the Muslims, began to use this particular pattern to build? Because they was building based upon the same pattern that they understood about the Atlantean culture. You see? It was a super civilization. Now, it ain't strange because during this time, you're dealing with the age of enlightenment, the golden age of the Moors and all that came behind these things here. But this is the way they built the city. You see, this is another expression of it. You can see here, but they put it almost like on a prayer rug, but you see the 4 different directions, the gateways. You see, it's significance behind these gateways, right? See the scales of justice. That's another expression of the same symbol with Arabic. The same chart. All of this going back, they was building. Now this is the European expression. They got 6 ways on it, which is really symbolic to a 6-pointed star, or whatever. 6 rays shining. This is what the European built that particular civilization off of. Notice the encyclopedia of the age of enlightenment, citizens and kings, right? Philosophy, politics, literature, science, theology, and art. Remember I told you they were more materialist than anything? So all of this has to do with things that you can see that's tangible. You see, and they call that the age of enlightenment. But they was trying to copycat these same symbols that I showed you right here, which go all the way back to Atlantis, because that was their time of enlightenment in the ancient time, right? Now, at one of the gates on the temple, they have a gate which they like to disrespectful. I think they like to refer to it as the Dung gate, D-U-N-G, which is really feces or whatever. This is what a lot of them like to disrespectfully demonstrate. But this is known as the Moroccan gate or the Moorish gate. They put Moroccan, it's really Moorish gate. Bab al-Maghrib. You see? See, it says this gate, and this is dealing with the gate along the western wall of Masjid al-Aqsa, is known as the Moroccan gate. It was named after the residents in adjacent neighborhood who, after the conquest by Salahuddin Ayyubi, you know who Salahuddin is, he defeated those in the crusade. It say had come to live in Jerusalem from Morocco. The gate is also known as the gate of the Moors. You see? Along the western wall, They talk about that especially one Hiram Abiff, he being taken on a westerly course and so forth and so on. And we know that further west from Morocco is the United States of America, but that's a whole nother mess. They even got a demonstration on the Western Cemetery. But in other words, these are things that are hidden often from the people. But nevertheless, we put it out there for you so you can get a drawing. You can't never say that the truth wasn't given to you. So in this time of what was known as the Islamic Golden Age, when they was building these structures in this way, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, as they called it, these were the Moors, you're talking about the civilization of Al-Andalus and the Iberian Peninsula, all that was thriving. Literature, as we can see, philosophy. This is when we was putting these teachings on the manifest. Ibn Rushd, science, mathematics, medicine, Muslim, Jews, Christians, everybody was actually moving, in unison to a certain degree. They had a little peace at that particular time. This was all under Islamic rule, the rule of the Moors. So all of this, the whole purpose still ties into what we're talking about when we deal with the Moorish mysticism and dealing with Allah. We're talking about the age of enlightenment, the golden age of the Moors. You see, which was supposed to be a reflection of the ancient age of enlightenment that actually was demonstrated by the Atlanteans because they brought a super civilization in. So the symbol of that layout was already depicted in Kemet. This is a Coptic symbol. Remember, they like to call it Coptic cross. And it was this symbol that Noble Drew Ali adopted as a symbol for the Moors. Now notice in the center you see the 7. You see, this is the symbol that's actually dealing with the Grand National seal, circling the 7, right? But notice, I showed you the unity between most of the teachings that are here. The mysticism, this is Islamism. This is how we demonstrate. Notice that we have from all schools of thought here. So we have no hatred toward those who demonstrate, this gospel that came through our brother Yahushua, known as Jesus. We have no conflict with those who demonstrate, from the aspects of Islam, Al-Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, basically Confucianism. We demonstrate the whole 360 degrees. And that's what you see me demonstrating when I was demonstrating what I just brought forth about this origin of the name Allah, the universal connection of this name. So if you looking for truth, then you welcome to come and get that universal truth here. We're not here to try to tear down and drag out the foundation of someone else. We're giving you the loftiest teachings of what they would call the teachings that come through the line of the ancient Nazarites, Essenes. We're giving you the most loftiest teachings that come through the teachings of Islam, Sufism and so forth. We're dealing with, again, Confucianism. We're dealing with Buddhism, Hinduism, everything. You see, that's where the love, truth, peace, freedom, and the justice come from. You see? And look at the gateways. We are taught that angels take messages from the center to the outer bound. You see the elements there. You see, you got earth, you got air, you got water, you got fire. You see? All of it there. And the ether is right here. Our ether came from our holy prophet. So that's a whole nother measure. So when you see the Moors with this particular measure, which has been on the manifest for some time, this symbol, it has very deep significance in it. That name Allah right there on the bottom, is synonymous with everything that's being expressed here. You see? That's the symbolism behind that. I'm actually trying to get here. I was talking earlier about, the crown chakra. Notice it says, as the bud unfolds to show the lotus of the blue ether plane, the world beyond the circle of the sun. Notice at the center you see that same symbol, the seal. And notice you see all different religious belief and teachings that are here. That is showing that all teachings come from one source. That's what's being demonstrated right there. That's the blue lotus, and that's a real blue lotus right there. Now, we was talking about Imhotep and being Nefertum. We mentioned this in the beginning of the video. This is Nefertum right here. Notice that there's the lotus coming forth from the center of the head. You see, all of this is symbolic. This represents enlightenment. So that's the unfoldment, all that wisdom. They weren't limited in their knowledge in Kemet. So when you see that, that's what you see. See, this is that white fez degree when you get up in the Istawa and you rise above, all the trivial conflict and everything. You deal with unity. You see? Last but not least, this is an expression of everything, pretty much in a nutshell, that is being demonstrated when we say we demonstrate the lofty teachings. When we say we demonstrate from every aspect, that's that same lotus right there. And I created this chart. What this is symbolic of, you see the card in the bar here, right? You're talking about soul and spirit. We say, well, one make circles or cycles around the Kaaba. The tassel swaying 360 degrees. But this is symbolic to the fact that everything you see here, really should be the wisdom that is within, we'll say, beneath the fez of any Moor. Every Moor should be adept enough to demonstrate universally from these standpoints. And that's how we demonstrate the science of expressing the reality of the universal Allah. We use that terminology, universal Allah, the great God Allah, the Allah of love. You see, the temple of it. We use all that terminology. You see the two expressions of Ma'at, that are dealing with really what we would call the expression of cherubim and seraphim. You see protect us by night and by day through the solar stations and so forth and so on. You see the extensions of the rays coming forth, which is all of this truth coming from various masterminds. You see, all of this is here. We can go into all of the symbolism, what the eye represents, which is the eye of Ra, enlightenment, so forth and so on. You see the scimitar and the star, which represent consciousness and man himself. We can see the heart of man being weighed in the balance here against the feather, and his heart should never outweigh the feather. You see, now we will say, well, the feather is supposed to be lighter than the heart. No, not in the spirit realm. And that's why you see Anpu here pulling on the plumb line, you see, and trying to see if this one is pretty much ready, if the heart is pure. If not, you see this little creature here, then he waiting to devour, this heart, if one ain't right. That's all symbolic. But that's HUHI, who referred to the scribe. That's Heru, you see? One that is the guide through the underworld or the upper world, so to speak. See the two pillars, the Chet pillars? And if that's the case, then you see, that man himself is tossed standing between the pillars. And if you look, you can see also that Alsar, he is sitting in the east for the judgment. But symbolically, everything that we have here in the Moorish paradigm, it has been brought to us to the west by Prophet Noble Drew, the Egyptian adept master. So it's a whole lot more to it, but that's just brief in a nutshell. When we deal with the Moorish teachings of mysticism, and we deal with the universal connections in regards to dealing with the name Allah, it's one God. There is no God but the great God. There is no reality but the supreme reality. Yahuwah, Huwa, Yahweh, Yod-He-Wav-He, Allah, Ahlah, however you want to say it, is one. And only a fool will deny without doing their own research or having no evidence. So with that being said, at this particular time, I'm going to close this measure out and I'm going to rest my form. But honest to all of you who have been able to sit here and get a drawing. So peace and love, family. Peace, love, and law. And we'll see you at the next hour.